If you've listened to this podcast for very long, you know that I am a huge proponent of repairing ruptures. So much so that you might even say it's the cornerstone of my approach, because this is what I see over and over and over, not only in my own relationship, but in the thousands of relationships that I've had the privilege of helping and untangling those knots, those stuck places with other couples. So, just a brief recap. A rupture is a break in the emotional bond between two people, most commonly between you and your attachment partner. When there is a break or rupture, then it must be repaired in order for the couple to reestablish their emotional bond. So this isn't hard to imagine. You're in a place of connection, things are going fine. Something happens with your partner, and there's some kind of rupture that occurs, a disagreement, a misattunement, different perspectives over how to solve a particular problem, whatever it might be. Now we're in a place of disconnection. And our whole goal is to figure out how do we come back and repair that rupture so we are back in a place where we feel more connected. Now, there's one piece of research that I think is really important for couples to know about that may explain why it's so important to repair ruptures and what happens if we don't. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Ziegarnik effect and why unresolved issues can haunt your relationship. Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information, as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Philp.
Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, there's a piece of research that was done in the 1920s that I think is really important and actually helps explain some of what happens with couples when they get stuck in a rupture and it's not repaired. And that piece of research is called the Ziegarnik effect. Now, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I looked up the pronunciation. I hope I'm doing that correctly. It is actually a person's name. So it comes out of a Lithuanian Soviet psychologist named Bluma Ziegarnik. So I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Hopefully Google guided me correctly in that pronunciation. But nonetheless, the Ziegarnik effect occurs when an activity has been interrupted that may be more readily recalled. In other words, people remember unfinished business or interrupted tasks better than they do completed tasks. And the experiment essentially was looking at waiters and waitresses that were able to remember and recall orders from tables that had not been completed yet, much better than they were able to recall any of the orders that had already been completed. So when somebody ordered at the table, they could retain that information longer. But once these people got the food, maybe wrapped up their meal, left the restaurant, then they were no longer able to recall what they had ordered. And so what this individual, this psychologist, realizes is that there's something that happens inside of us that sort of lingers in our bodies and in our minds and helps us remember things that are unprocessed, remember things that are interrupted and uncompleted better than completing completed tasks. So this is essentially what the Ziegarnik effect is. This occurs because, as I said, unfinished tasks, that actually creates tension and an activation in the mind that makes details about the task more memorable. Once the task is completed, this tension is released and the details start fading from memory. So that's sort of the experiment in itself. That's essentially what the Ziegarnik effect is. Let's put this into context of our relationships with our couples. So, for example, many couples, especially in the early parts of their therapy, maybe the first 5 sessions, something like that, they will come in and they will want to recount the latest argument, almost as if I'm going to referee for them. They can recall the details of who said what to whom and in what order, and they begin arguing those details ad nauseum. Now, the reason they can remember those details so well is because the argument has not been resolved. It's been interrupted. And it's been interrupted either because one partner needed space and shut down or walked away, or because maybe both partners felt they weren't getting anywhere, so they decided to take a break, but they never came back to revisit it for fear that they're going to rekindle the same old feelings or the same defensive behaviors in their partner. So I get couples all the time that will come in and they'll want to recount the argument they had that week. And well, this is what happened, and this is what they said. And no, I didn't say that. Oh, yes, you did. You said it in this tone of voice too. I didn't. I wasn't yelling. You're exaggerating that. And they go back and forth and back and forth. And of course, that gets them nowhere. And it's my job to help them see below the argument what's really going on there. But that's often what happens. And I firmly believe, in part, the reason they can remember those details or think they can remember those details so well is because it was uninterrupted. It's unresolved. It's unrepaired rupture, and it's lingering in their mind and in their body, this kind of negativity. So let's juxtapose that to some other couples that I have come in, that they've been with me long enough that they've learned how to de-escalate their trauma cycles. They're not as reactive and as defensive with one another. Now, they may come in and they may tell me they had some kind of argument or disagreement during the week, but they can't recall the details. And so they'll often say to me, I don't know what it was about. We worked through it, so it must not have been a big deal. Or, yeah, I can remember something too, but some kind of disagreement. I'm not sure what it was about. Anyway, we used the tools and repaired it, so it's over with. So they can barely recall oftentimes what the argument was about, or the details of it, or who said what to whom, or what the tone of voice was, because they have repaired their rupture. So that negativity does not stay inside them or inside their bodies like it does with unrepaired ruptures. And this is partly because couples have learned to repair their ruptures, and so they do not push their unresolved ruptures under the rug to never revisit them again. And so I believe that this Ziegarnik effect, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I sure hope I am, I really believe that this can account for much of what happens and why it is so important to repair ruptures. And so here's the point of all of this. Unrepaired ruptures create tension and negativity in the body, which the individual holds onto until the time of which they are able to resolve it. This is especially true of the anxiously attached style. So if you lean more on the anxious attachment style, then the unrepaired ruptures really do a number on you. The unfinished business really sits uneasy inside of you, and it might create more anxiety. You might find yourself heavily distracted. You can't focus on work. Your mind feels like it's running a hamster on a wheel. You can't stop thinking about it. You run it over and over and over in your mind. And so it actually elevates and creates a lot of anxiety in you. So this is especially true of I believe, the more anxious style of attachment. Now, don't get me wrong. The more avoidant style of attachment, they may be better able to compartmentalize the stress and tension, but don't misunderstand, it's still there. It's still inside their body, and it's lurking in one of the unopened compartments in which they have put it in. So they may be able to handle or self-soothe that better, but that tension still resides in their bodies and in their minds. And so unrepaired ruptures stick with us. It's kind of like gum underneath the table that's really hard to get off after it's been hardened for a while. Or it's like I don't know, another good metaphor I'm trying to think here. It's like molasses. It's slow and it's thick and it's hard and it's gooey and it doesn't go away easily until we're able to resolve ruptures. If enough repaired ruptures linger in the relationship, then this can actually create what John Gottman calls the negative sentiment override, meaning the individual tends to see their partner and the relationship in more negative terms than positive terms. In other words, there's more withdrawals taken out of the bank than there are deposits for you financial experts out there, right? And if you take out enough withdrawals and you don't put in enough deposits, eventually you're going to run into the red and you're going to have a negative a bank account. And this, I think, is what kind of happens. More and more unrepaired ruptures that are left unfinished, interrupted, we sweep them under the rug. That tension stays with us. And then the next rupture we had, it's like adding or withdrawing in this account, or in this case, with the metaphor I'm using, it's like taking more money out of the bank. And it's depositing more negativity into our bodies in that sense. So how do we begin to repair ruptures more often? Well, I don't want to go into that in this podcast, but I've done plenty of other podcasts. So let me point you there because I think they do a better job and it's not as long as trying to add it on to this one. So go back if you want to and look at episode 28 because I talk about the rupture repair cycle. And I reiterate why it is so important to repair ruptures. And I really break that down and I put it into context. And so that one give you a really good overview of the rupture repair cycle itself. Episode 32, making faster repair attempts using second level communication. What I mean there is that often couples, as I've alluded to earlier in this podcast, they come in and they want to talk about what happened at the level of the event. Who said what to whom and in what order, with what tone of voice, and so on and so forth, and almost use therapy as a mediator or a referee. And that's not a good use of therapy. That's not what we do as therapists. And so what I help couples do, and this isn't explicit, it's more implicit, by helping them to settle down in their bodies, helping them to tap into their more vulnerable emotions. What happens is they begin to use second level communication, meaning that they no longer want to talk about the event itself. They want to talk about their feelings and their perceptions from their own sense of self. And when that happens, they become way less reactive with one another, and they really start having the kinds of conversations they really need to be able to have. And so that I lay out in episode 32. In episode 35, it's called Unscripted Love, and I basically walk you through, I think it's 10 to 12 to 15, somewhere in there, actual statements you can use with your partner when you begin to make a repair attempt. And I do that from an anxious attachment style as well as an avoidant attachment style. And so there's some actual verbiage you can use, and feel free to feel free to steal that explicitly. It is there for you. You can use it word for word until you feel comfortable with it enough that you kind of make it your own. So you can practice those as you're beginning to make better repairs with your partner. But I think today's podcast is something I've been chewing on for a while. The Ziegarnik effect explains a lot about how negative sentiment override can take over in a relationship through unrepaired ruptures. And of course, if you've listened to this podcast very long, you know I define in part trauma as being unrepaired ruptures. Ruptures that were created either because of one horrific an event like a sudden death of a spouse or a loved one, or an affair that shatters the person's worldview and sense of self, or small ruptures that get repeated over time and never repaired, or small ruptures that aren't handled well that lead to larger ruptures. But I really think that trauma is unrepaired ruptures. When we're able to repair those, it settles something in our minds and in our bodies. We begin to process it. We don't remember the details, and the emotions of those memories are not as strong. So I hope today was helpful in thinking about some of the research that actually informs why I think rupture repair is just so important in our relationships, not only our intimate romantic relationships, but I would say in any and all of our relationships, your relationships with your parents, your siblings, or your coworkers. This model, I think, prevents, when done right and well, prevents trauma from happening because it forces us to learn how to make repairs as much as possible, I will say, within our closest relationships. So I hope you found this interesting. Once again, thank you for all your feedback. I really, really appreciate it. I love what I'm hearing from you guys. And let me know if there's anything you want me to focus in particular that you'd love to hear more about. I'm always open to ideas that surround our relationships and trauma. Those can be separate, or they can be something that comes together, that truly informs the Trauma-Free Relationship podcast. So thank you very much. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.